Good Sunday morning. Welcome to this Sunday worship of Midcoast Presbyterian Church. I am Pastor Diane of Midcoast Presbyterian Church, and I'm so glad to welcome you here to this first Sunday of 2021, this Sunday of Epiphany.
Our first lesson is from Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 6, the Voice translation. Arise, shine, for your light has broken through. The Eternal One's brilliance has dawned. See truly, look carefully. Darkness blankets the earth. People all over are cloaked in darkness. But God will rise and shine on you. The Eternal's bright glory will shine on you, a light for all to see. Nations north and south, peoples east and west, will be drawn to your light, will find purpose and direction by your light. In the radiance of your rising, you will enlighten the leaders of nations. Don't be shy, don't be doubtful. Lift up your eyes and look around. They have gathered all around you, eager to come and be close to you. And your children will come back to this land, your sons from the farthest places of wandering, and your daughters gently carried home. And when you see it, your face will glow, your heart will race and be filled with joy. For great ships will arrive with gifts from across the sea, and the wealth of nations will make their way to you. Herd after herd of camels will cover the land. Caravans arriving daily from the south and southwest, Midian, Ephah, even Sheba, with gifts of gold and frankincense. They will announce for all the world to hear, the Eternal be praised. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, our second lesson comes to us from the Gospel of Matthew, and I'll be reading from the Message translation this morning. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem village, Judah territory, this was during Herod's kingship. A band of scholars arrived in Jerusalem from the east. They asked around, "Where can we find and pay homage to the newborn king of the Jews? We observed a star in the eastern sky that signaled his birth. We're on a pilgrimage to worship him." When word of their inquiry got to Herod, he was terrified. And not Herod alone, but most of Jerusalem as well. Herod lost no time. He gathered all the high priests and religion scholars in the city together and asked, "Where is this Messiah supposed to be born?" They told him, "Bethlehem, Judah territory. The prophet Micah wrote it plainly. It's you, Bethlehem, in Judah's land, no longer bringing up the rear. From you will come the leader who will shepherd rule my people, my Israel." Herod then arranged a secret meeting with the scholars from the east. Pretending to be as devout as they were, he got them to tell him exactly when the birth announcement star appeared. Then he told them the prophecy about Bethlehem and said, "Go find this child. Leave no stone unturned. As soon as you find him, send word, and I'll join you at once in your worship." Instructed by the king, they set off. Then the star appeared again, the same star they had seen in the eastern skies. It led them on until it hovered over the place of the child. They could hardly contain themselves. They were in the right place. They had arrived at the right time. They entered the house and saw the children in the arms of Mary, his mother. Overcome, they kneeled and worshiped him. Then they opened their luggage and presented gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In a dream, they were warned not to report back to Herod, so they worked out another route. left the territory without being seen, and returned to their own country. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's a new year. It's a new setup. I'm shifting a little closer to you. I have a couple different microphones I'll be switching back and forth on, so you'll be seeing me fiddle around. I've got all my liquids to keep that voice from frogging up, but God only knows in the morning it's kind of tough to keep the frog out of your throat. So let's dive in. They arrived, the Magi, the king, the wise men. However they are referenced, we can finally put them up with the rest of the nativity. There they are, right there. I hope you all have your three kings, your wise men, your scholars. As most of you know, I had an early experience in seminary, which convinced me it's more appropriate to keep these three guys traveling until Epiphany, which is actually January 6th, but for our purposes, today works. So what were they looking for? These three wise guys. And for that matter, what are we looking for? What are you looking for? Well, as the sage Old Testament professor Walter Brueggemann puts it, Matthew is not the first one to imagine three rich, wise guys from the East coming to Jerusalem. His storyline and plot come from Isaiah 60, which we heard from Tamia earlier. It is a poem recited to Jews in Jerusalem about 580 years before the birth of Christ, when Jews who'd been in exile for a couple of generations had come back to the bombed out city of Jerusalem. They were in despair. Who wants to live in a city where the towers are torn down and the economy has failed and nobody knows what to do about it? Well, in the middle of that mess, an amazing poet invites his depressed, discouraged contemporaries to look up, to hope, and to expect everything to change. It's a good message for us, isn't it, as we head into this new year? Rise up, shine, for your light has come. The poet anticipates that Jerusalem will become a beehive of productivity and prosperity, a new center of international trade. Nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Caravans loaded with trade goods will come from Asia and bring prosperity. This is cause for celebration. God has promised to make the city work effectively in peace, and a promise from God is very sure. Well, like Matthew, the wise men know about Isaiah 60. They know they are to go to Jerusalem and to take rare spices, gold and frankincense, and myrrh. Most important, they know they will find the new king of all peace and prosperity. But when Herod, the current king in Jerusalem, hears of these plans, he is frightened. A new king is a threat to the old king and the old order. As we know, insecurity breeds abuse of power. And so a strange thing happens in his panic. Herod arranges a consultation with the leading Old Testament scholars, and he says to them, tell me about what you're doing, about this business of camels and gold. And the scholars, who actually didn't know the right text until Herod's own wise people explained to them, you have the wrong text. And the right text comes to us from the prophet Micah. Isaiah 60 will mislead you because it suggests that Jerusalem will prosper and have great urban wealth and be restored as the center of global economy. In that scenario, the urban elites can recover their former power and prestige, and nothing will really change. Well, Herod certainly did not like that. And so the scholars did explain that the prophet Micah had actually said that it was Bethlehem of Ephrathah. From you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old. Micah anticipated a leader who would bring well-being to his people, not by great political ambition, but by attentiveness to the folks on the ground. Isn't that extraordinary? A king, a world power who wants the best for the ordinary people. Do we really want a king who comes up from the ordinary? I know that many of us have been enjoying the many seasons of The Crown, which are inspired by the life and times of the Queen Elizabeth of England, the United Kingdom, and for a few seasons, seemingly the queen of the world, as Britain ruled over many and varied lands around the world. Have you been impressed by all that glitters? The opening shots of this series focus on the regal and overwhelming opulent crown jewels, which, if you've ever seen them in person, are pretty over the top. Jewels, gold, all things representative of wealth and prestige. I have to admit that some of the most, what I would think of as over the top pomp and regality have actually made me a little uncomfortable. There's a scene that is sort of shown quite frequently. I think it's become iconic of The Crown. And it's the scene where the royals are standing on the porch and all of the little people are down below them. And overhead flies the Royal Air Force, streaming all these colors of the flag. It's exciting, yes. But all I could think was all that money they're wearing on them, all that money invested in their palaces, in the paintings and the gold inlay and the furniture. Money that could have been so much better spent. I'm starting to sound a little like that guy who said, oh, you shouldn't have broken up that jar. But the other scene that makes me a little uncomfortable is that big scene where there's the investiture of Prince Charles. Oh my goodness, the robes and the attention to detail and the need to follow exactly the ritual. Now, I don't know that I've enjoyed the glamour and glitter as much as I have enjoyed the episodes that have revealed the vulnerability of Queen Elizabeth. Consider this, the third season of The Crown tackled a very dark moment in history of the United Kingdom, when in 1966, a coal waste, this big giant mountain, tipped and collapsed and slid into a school in the mining village of Aberfan in Wales. It claimed the lives of 144 people. And if you've seen it, you also saw all those little coffins lined up, all of these lives lost, these little children, tragedy. And as the show correctly depicts, at first Queen Elizabeth neglected to visit Aberfan and instead sent Prince Philip. Well, after about a week, she finally visited the village. And later she said that her delayed response was her biggest regret as queen. History.com reports that while in the village, the monarch showed poignant grief. And they show this on The Crown, where we see tears coming from the face of someone who has found it very, very hard to cry. I was deeply moved by how the story unfolded. And in fact, I went and looked at more details just to find out how truthful it was. It was a rather accurate depiction to show that at first it seemed beneath the queen to go to such a small, unknown, little Bethlehem kind of a town like Aberfan. But she did go, and she eventually realized how wrong she had been to neglect the people who had lost so much. especially so many children. I was incredibly touched, and there's no doubt she was incredibly changed by it. Another episode that I'm very fond of is the story of Michael Fagan, a 33-year-old London-born unemployed man who had somehow managed to stay undetected through all palace security, becoming the best known Buckingham Palace intruder. It's a great story. And The Crown, as it depicts the episode, puts it in the context of the times when commoners couldn't find work, they were suffering unspeakable living conditions, and so much more seemed to be suffering under a seemingly tone-deaf prime minister who expected the people to simply pull themselves up out of poverty on their own. They didn't need help. She didn't need help, and so they didn't. The reality of how hard it is to climb out of such deep debt and lack of resources is revealed in that episode. Just as we have also become more aware over this past year of the true nature of what it means to start off in life with money and education, as opposed to living in generations of poverty and lack of proper nutrition, shelter, and family structure. Well, as The Crown tells it, the Queen became more aware of what the people were suffering and recognized her own culpability. And she seems to make this rare political move to improve the life in the United Kingdom. Reality? Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I again was moved by what happens when a world leader becomes vulnerable and opens their eyes to suffering and deprivation. Now, the narrative of Epiphany is the story of two human communities. Jerusalem with its great pretensions, and Bethlehem with its modest promises. What are we looking for? What are we looking for? Are we looking for a king of great power who can put us back on the top, back in a place of self-reliance and power and just the leading force in the world? Or are we looking for a vulnerable leader, one whose heart is with the people, who is driven by love more than anything else? Well, ahead of us, just as in Epiphany time, we can choose to return in a triumphalist mode to normalcy, a life of self-sufficiency, which does contain its own seeds of destruction. As we've seen by those who refuse to follow the protocols that will keep us all safe. The more we have remembered how connected we are and how we are all in this together. And when leadership has exemplified this same connectedness, this same ability to give up one's own individuality, so to speak, to act out of love and concern for others. So we have this opportunity to choose an alternative time of hope, where we can let go of what we thought was normal and instead look into a new normal to a certain extent. I hope it's a new normal. Life given in vulnerability. It is amazing, the true accent of Epiphany, that the wise men do not resist this alternative, but they go to the village. They are looking for a king, and rather than hesitate or resist, they reorganize their wealth and learning and reorient themselves and their lives around a baby with no credentials. Our task is to let the vulnerability of this story disrupt our expectations. Are we looking in the wrong place? What are we looking for? We are invited to travel those hard, demanding miles away from self-sufficiency. And this Epiphany time is the journey. It's the beginning of the journey of looking for the right things. The way beyond is not about security and prosperity, but about vulnerability, neighborliness, generosity, a modest future, with spears turned into pruning hooks and swords into plowshares. This near year, we are invited to look for a king who does not overcome by power, but by love. From the bottom, from the heart, overcomes with love. Love poured out in his blood into a cup where we will gather at the Lord's table and we will partake of that poured out blood, that wine of a new covenant of love. And we will also break bread and be nourished by the body of Jesus Christ on the bread of heaven, which invites us on this Epiphany journey. Thanks be to God.